I don't know why certain encounters leave scars deeper than years of life. Sometimes they seem like pure chance, but maybe it's fate deciding to remind you that you're alive right before it breaks you. That evening in Chicago was colder than it should have been for October. The wind off Lake Michigan slammed against the windows, as if trying to break inside. I was sitting in a small jazz bar on the corner of Milwaukee Avenue. The place was almost empty, except for a couple of regulars and a group of musicians tuning their instruments. I had come here to escape my own thoughts. Work was pressing in. Home felt empty, and the air already smelled of the loneliness of a long winter. And then she walked in. Tall, wrapped in a dark blue coat, her hair in disarray, like the wind loved her more than anyone else in this city. Her eyes swept across the room and, for a fraction of a second, stopped on me, as if she recognized something. She sat near the stage, ordered a glass of whiskey, and lit a cigarette. And in that moment I knew I wasn't going anywhere tonight. The band started playing, a slow, smoky tune that wrapped itself around the room like warm silk. She leaned back in her chair, one leg crossed over the other, the amber in her glass catching the dim light. I couldn't stop watching her, and she seemed perfectly aware of it. Halfway through the second song, she glanced over, holding my gaze just long enough to make me feel like I'd been caught doing something dangerous. Then she smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that felt like an invitation. I got up before I had the chance to second-guess myself. My footsteps felt louder than they should have as I crossed the room. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, gesturing toward the chair next to her. She looked at it, then at me, her lips curling into something between amusement and curiosity. "It depends," she said. Her voice was low, deliberate. "Are you good company?" "I've been told I'm passable," I replied. Her laugh was soft, almost private, as if she didn't want to share it with the rest of the bar. "Sit then." I lowered myself into the chair, suddenly more aware of the music, the faint smell of her perfume, jasmine with something darker beneath it. "I'm Daniel," I said. She paused for a beat, watching me, as though deciding how much of herself to reveal. "Clara," she finally said, and it felt like the name had been waiting for me all my life. The music shifted, brass giving way to a sultry piano, the kind that makes the air feel thicker. Clara's eyes flickered toward the stage, but I could see her attention was still partly on me. "You come here often?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said, swirling the whiskey in her glass, "but only when I need to remember something or forget something." The answer was vague enough to invite questions, but I let it hang there. I knew the rules of these moments. You don't rush them. We listened for a while, letting the music fill the spaces our words didn't. The saxophone wailed softly, and her foot tapped in time. I noticed her hands, long fingers, nails painted the deep red of old movie theaters. "Do you dance?" she asked suddenly. I smiled. "Not well." "Good," she said, finishing her drink. "Neither do I." Before I could respond, she stood and walked toward the small patch of floor near the stage. There wasn't really a dance floor, but people made one when the music demanded it. She turned, waiting. I followed, and the moment my hand touched hers, something shifted, like the city outside had gone silent. We moved slowly, almost lazily, letting the music lead us. I could feel the warmth of her through the fabric of her coat, the faint rhythm of her breathing. When the song ended, we didn't step apart right away. Her eyes searched mine, and there was a quiet in them that felt like both a promise and a warning. Outside, the wind hit us like a cold slap, carrying the metallic scent of the lake. Chicago at night felt alive in a different way. Neon signs buzzing, the rumble of the elevated train in the distance, steam curling up from the street vents. Clara pulled her coat tighter around herself, her hair whipping across her face. "God, I love this city," she said, almost to herself. "Even in weather like this?" I asked. "Especially in weather like this," she replied, smiling sideways at me.
Makes you feel like you have to earn the warmth. We walked with no real direction, our footsteps echoing off brick walls. She told me she'd moved here 5 years ago, chasing a job that didn't last and a dream she couldn't quite name. I told her about my work in an office high enough to see the lake on clear days, about how I'd come to the bar tonight just to escape the walls closing in. At the corner of a narrow side street, we stopped. There was a faint glow from a bakery still open, its windows fogged. "Hungry?" I asked. She shrugged, then grinned. "Why not?" Inside, the smell of fresh bread and sugar was almost intoxicating. We sat by the window with 2 cups of coffee and shared a slice of warm cherry pie. She ate slowly, savoring each bite like it mattered. "You know," she said, fork poised in midair, "most people live their lives without realizing they're in the middle of the best part until it's gone." I looked at her for a long moment, the steam from our coffee rising between us. "Maybe some of us do realize it," I said quietly. Her gaze lingered on mine, and in that small bakery with the wind clawing at the glass, I felt the first undeniable pull toward her, the kind that doesn't ask permission. We lingered in the bakery until the clock over the counter crept past midnight. Outside, the streets had thinned, the city's noise fading into a low hum. Clara stood, slipping her gloves on slowly, as if buying time. "Where do you live?" I asked. She said, "A few blocks from here. I'll walk." We stepped back into the cold. Our shadows stretched long under the streetlights, weaving together and pulling apart with each step. The wind carried snippets of faraway music, someone's radio maybe, or a band finishing a set in a basement club. When she reached her building, she stopped in front of the heavy wooden door. The hallway light above us flickered. "Well," she said softly, "thank you for not being boring tonight." I laughed. High praise. She tilted her head, studying me for a beat longer than comfort allowed. Then she reached up, her gloved hand brushing my cheek, so lightly I almost thought I had imagined it. "Good night, Daniel." She turned and disappeared inside without looking back. I stood there for a while, hands deep in my pockets, staring at the closed door. The city felt different now, like it was holding a secret I'd just been let in on. And somewhere, in the pit of my stomach, I knew I would see her again. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm I hadn't known I'd been missing. We met again the very next night, as if neither of us could pretend it was just a coincidence. And then again 2 days later. Soon there was no point in keeping track. Clara had a way of making the city feel smaller, pulling me into corners of Chicago I'd never noticed. Dim-lit speakeasies hidden behind unmarked doors, record stores that smelled of dust and time, rooftops where the skyline stretched like a heartbeat. Some nights we'd sit in the back of a jazz bar, barely talking, letting the music do all the work. Other times we'd walk for hours, her stories spilling out between cigarette drags, tales of childhood summers in Savannah, of the year she spent in Paris chasing something she couldn't quite name. She never gave everything away, always leaving pieces for me to guess at. Once we danced in the middle of Wabash Avenue at 2 in the morning, no music but the distant hum of traffic. She laughed until she leaned into me, breathless, her forehead against my chest. And yet, there were moments, fleeting, almost invisible, when her smile would falter, when her eyes would go far away. I didn't ask, not yet, because love, I was learning, wasn't just about the bright days. It was about holding on through the ones when the light felt distant. One evening, as the city lights flickered behind the rain-streaked window of Clara's apartment, the music playing low and smooth in the background, something in her eyes changed. We had been talking about everything and nothing, laughter mingling with the soft clink of glasses. But then, for a brief moment, her gaze drifted past me, unfocused, like she was listening to a distant sound I couldn't hear. "Is something wrong?" I asked gently. She shook her head, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just old ghosts," she said quietly. I didn't press. Some things aren't ready to be told. Later, as I walked home through the slick streets, the city felt colder than before. the warmth from her apartment slipping through my fingers like smoke. That night, the wind howled against the windows like a warning. Clara and I spent weekends wandering the city's quieter streets, discovering small cafes tucked away between towering buildings, places where the baristas knew our names and the coffee was always just right. We talked about dreams and regrets, about the kind of life we each hoped to build, and sometimes about nothing at all, simply enjoying the rare silence between us. One evening, we found ourselves in a small vinyl shop, the air thick with nostalgia and the crackle of old jazz records. Clara ran her fingers over the album covers, a smile playing on her lips. "Music," she said, "is how I make sense of the world. It's honest." I nodded, watching her more than the records. There was something pure in the way she spoke, something that made me want to believe in forever, even just for a moment.
Back at her apartment, the city lights blinking like distant stars, we cooked dinner together, sharing stories between chopping vegetables and laughter that filled every corner of the room. For once, the weight of the world felt lighter. Spring crept quietly into Chicago, melting the winter's edge and painting the city in soft greens and pale pinks. The lake breeze carried a promise of change, but for Clara and me, the world felt paused in a perfect moment, fragile and bright. We spent afternoons in Millennium Park, sitting beneath budding trees, sharing stories about the past, about the people we once were before we found each other. She liked to trace patterns on my palm with her finger, as if mapping the lines that connected us. One day, she brought an old, worn book of poems she'd found in a second-hand store, pages yellowed and fragile. We read to each other in low voices, our words blending with the distant laughter of children playing nearby. There was a quiet comfort in those moments, like the city itself was holding its breath for us. But beneath the surface, I could sometimes catch a shadow cross her face, a flicker of something she was still keeping hidden. I didn't ask, not yet. Because love, I was learning, wasn't just about the bright days. It was about holding on through the ones when the light felt distant. One rainy afternoon, Clara and I found refuge in a small bookstore tucked away on a quiet street. The scent of aged paper and ink wrapped around us like a warm blanket. She pulled a book from the shelf, a collection of letters between two lovers separated by war. "Love can be fragile," she said softly, tracing the faded handwriting with her finger. "But it's also the most stubborn thing in the world." I watched her eyes, shimmering with something unspoken. The rain tapped lightly against the window, as if urging us to listen. We sat together in a corner, the world outside blurring into streaks of gray. Our hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, no need for words. For a moment, everything felt still, but I knew, deep down, that the storm was coming. Days grew longer, but the light in Clara's eyes sometimes flickered like a candle in a draft. One evening, as we sat on her worn-out couch, the city humming softly outside the window, she hesitated before speaking. "There's something I haven't told you," she murmured, voice barely above the music playing from an old record player. I reached for her hand, steadying her with my own. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." She swallowed hard, eyes fixed on a crack in the wooden floor. "It's about my past. Things I thought I left behind." The air thickened between us, fragile and electric. I wanted to promise her safety, but the truth felt like a shadow creeping closer. "We don't have to talk about it now," I said gently. "Whenever you're ready." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. And in that quiet surrender, our love grew stronger. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Weeks passed, and Clara's past remained a silent presence between us, a locked door we both hesitated to open. One rainy night, as thunder rolled over the city, there was a knock at her apartment door. Her face tightened for a moment before she moved to answer. I stayed back, heart tightening in my chest. A man's voice, low, tense, drifted through the crack of the door. "I need to see Clara."
She spoke firmly, but quietly, and I caught a flash of something unspoken in her eyes. When she closed the door, her hands trembled slightly. "That was someone from before," she said, voice barely a whisper. "It's complicated." I didn't press. Some battles are fought in silence. That night, I held her close, feeling the weight of unspoken fears between us. Days turned restless. Clara's phone buzzed at odd hours, her face growing more distant with each call. She'd step out onto the fire escape to take them, voice low and clipped, leaving me alone with the city's restless hum. One evening, as we walked along the riverwalk beneath the orange glow of street lamps, I finally voiced what had been gnawing in my chest. "Who is he?" I asked, not looking at her. She stopped, the cold biting at her cheeks. "Someone I should have left behind, but he hasn't left me." Her words hung between us, heavier than the night air. "I want to protect you," I said softly, "but I don't know how." Clara looked up, her eyes shining with something fierce. "Maybe you can't. Maybe this is my battle to fight." I reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. "Then I fight with you together." For a moment, the city around us faded, and all that mattered was the promise between us, fragile, fierce, and real. The days grew heavier, shadows stretching longer over our time together. Clara became more guarded, retreating into herself after each tense phone call. One evening, I waited outside her building, watching the glow of her apartment window flicker as she paced inside. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were rimmed red, not from tears, but from exhaustion and something deeper I couldn't name. "I didn't want you to see this side of me," she said quietly. I reached for her hand. "I want to see all of you," I replied, "not just the bright parts." She looked away for a moment, then met my gaze again. "There are things I've done, choices I'm not proud of." I took a step closer, feeling the weight of her confession settle between us. "Whatever your past holds, it doesn't change what you are to me," I said firmly. For a fleeting moment, a fragile smile crossed her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. But as I left that night, the cold air bit deeper than usual, and I knew the hardest fight was yet to come. The air between us grew thicker, charged with things left unsaid. Clara's past wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a storm gathering just beyond the horizon, and I could feel its cold breath on my neck. One night, she came to me, eyes wide and restless, her hands trembling just enough to betray the calm she tried to hold. "They're coming back," she whispered. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this at bay." I pulled her close, feeling the fragile weight of her fear. "We'll face it together," I promised, although my own heart hammered in doubt. But beneath that promise, a quiet dread took root, because some battles don't end with words or courage alone. The night was heavy with rain, the city's usual buzz muffled under a thick gray sky. Clara's phone rang again, sharp, insistent. She hesitated, then answered. Her face went pale, eyes darting around as she listened. "I have to go," she said, voice tight. "Where?" I asked, but she was already grabbing her coat. Some things from my past don't wait for a convenient time. We moved through the rain-soaked streets, the city's shadows swallowing us whole. At a dimly lit corner, a figure emerged, tall, dark, eyes cold as winter ice. "You didn't think you could hide forever," the man said, voice low and threatening. Clara's grip on my hand tightened. "Leave us alone." But he smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "You owe me, Clara, and I always collect." In that moment, the fragile world we'd built cracked wide open, and I realized love alone might not be enough to save us. The man's words hung in the damp air like a curse. Clara's breath hitched, but she stood her ground, eyes fierce despite the tremor in her hands. "I don't owe you anything anymore," she said, voice steady but laced with pain. He stepped closer, and I felt a surge of protectiveness rise in me, raw and unfiltered. "Watch yourself," he warned. "You know what's coming if you don't pay up." Before I could react, Clara grabbed my arm, urgency flashing in her eyes. "We have to go. Now!" We slipped into the maze of Chicago's back streets, the rain washing away our footprints, but not the dread tightening around my chest. For the first time, I saw the cracks beneath Clara's strength. The past she fought so hard to escape was no longer a ghost, but a looming storm. And I knew, whatever came next, we were bound together, for better or worse. The days that followed were a blur of whispered phone calls and hurried glances. Clara moved like a shadow, never staying in one place too long. One evening, as the city's neon lights flickered through the rain-speckled window of my apartment, she sat silently, staring at the floor. "I thought I left it all behind," she confessed finally, voice cracking. "But the past, it never really lets go." I reached out, pulling her close. "We'll find a way through this, together." Her eyes searched mine, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. But beneath that fragile hope, I felt the weight of the storm closing in, a storm that threatened to tear us apart. The days grew colder, and Clara's walls grew higher. She'd disappear for hours, returning with eyes that held secrets she couldn't or wouldn't share. One night, I found her standing on the rooftop. The city sprawled beneath like a restless sea of lights. The wind tugged at her coat, and she looked out, as if searching for something lost
to the shadows. "I can't keep running," she whispered, voice trembling, "but facing it feels impossible." I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around her. "You're not alone. Whatever comes, we face it together." Her breath hitched. "Promise me you'll stay." "I promise," I said. For a moment, the world was just us, fragile, trembling, but unbroken. It was a night that felt like the calm before the storm. The city's light shimmered on wet pavement, and distant thunder rumbled low to warn of what was to come. Clara and I walked hand in hand through the nearly empty streets, the cold air sharp against our faces. For a few stolen moments, the past felt miles away. But then from the shadows, a figure stepped forward, silent, imposing, a silhouette cut from the darkness itself. Before I could react, Clara froze, her grip tightening around my hand. "I told you," she whispered, eyes locked on the stranger. "This isn't over." The man's voice was a razor in the night. "You can't run forever." In that instant, everything shattered. The fragile peace, the future we dared to dream, the love we fought to protect. The figure stepped closer, the dim streetlight revealing a face etched with cold menace. I instinctively moved in front of Clara, my heart pounding like a drum in the silence between us. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. The man smiled, a cruel, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Someone from her past she hoped you'd never meet." Clara's fingers clenched into fists at her sides, her body tense but refusing to break. "He warned you," he said, voice low and deadly. "There's a debt that must be paid." I looked at Clara, searching for some hint of a way out, but her eyes were glassy with fear and determination. "We face it," I said firmly, "together." The man's smile faded, replaced with a dangerous glint. "Then prepare yourselves, because the storm is coming." The man's warning echoed between us, a shadow that refused to fade. Clara took a shaky breath, stepping closer to me as if drawing strength from my presence. "You don't know everything," she whispered, "but you will soon." His eyes flickered with something dangerous, impatience, maybe rage. "Time's running out." Suddenly a sharp noise cracked the stillness, a siren wailing in the distance, pulling at the edges of the night. The man's gaze darted toward the sound. "This isn't over,"
he said before melting back into the shadows, leaving us alone beneath the flickering street lamp. I reached for Clara's hand, fingers intertwining tightly with hers. "Whatever comes," I said, "we face it as one." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes held a flicker of hope. The days grew colder, and the weight of the past pressed down harder on us. Clara's smiles became rare, fleeting like shadows that vanish in the light. We spent long nights whispering, trying to hold on to the fragile peace left between us, but the city seemed to close in tighter, the distant sound sharper, the shadows longer. One evening, I found Clara staring out the window, her eyes empty, searching for something she didn't want to find. "Are you ready?" I asked softly. She turned to me, a tear tracing down her cheek. "I don't know if I ever will be." The fragile world we built was trembling on the edge of collapse, and neither of us knew how to stop the fall. The next evening, as we walked through a deserted street, headlights suddenly blinded us. A car screeched to a halt beside us, and two men jumped out. They grabbed Clara, their grip fierce and merciless. I tried to intervene, but they shoved me back hard. "Stay out of this," one hissed, before dragging her into the darkness. I stood frozen, heart pounding, helpless as her figure disappeared. That moment shattered everything, the fragile love, the hope, and the future we dreamed of. I ran after them, but the city swallowed her whole. The dark alleys, the empty streets, the cold night air closing in like a trap. Days passed without a word. The police were cautious, slow to act, and I was left with only questions and a growing sense of dread. Then one evening, a call came. Her voice, weak, trembling, broke through the static. "They're holding me. I can't." The line went dead. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew then that our fight had truly begun, one where love alone might not be enough to save her. The days that followed were a desperate blur, every second stretched thin with fear and hope. I scoured the city, chasing every lead, following whispers and shadows. Clara's absence was a hollow ache that settled deep inside me. Yet, even in that void, I clung to the memory of her smile, the warmth of her hand in mine. One night, a note arrived, slipped under my door. "Trust no one. Meet me at the pier. Midnight. Alone." My heart hammered as I stood beneath the flickering street lamp, the cold wind biting through my coat. Would this be a chance to find her, or a trap I couldn't escape? Midnight at the pier was silent except for the lapping of dark water against the wooden pilings. I stood shivering, every shadow twisting into a threat. A figure emerged from the fog. Clara. Her face was pale, eyes haunted but fierce. "They're watching," she whispered. "They want me gone, but I'm not giving up." Before I could react, footsteps echoed behind us. Too many, too close. We had no choice but to run, hearts pounding, breath ragged. In that chase through the maze of docks and warehouses, the fragile thread holding us together stretched to its limit. We darted through the labyrinth of crates and shipping containers, the echoes of footsteps chasing us like ghosts. Clara stumbled once and I caught her before she fell. "We can't keep running," she gasped, eyes wild but determined. Ahead, a narrow stairwell led up to a rusted catwalk overlooking the water. We scrambled up, desperate for a moment's safety. From above, the city light shimmered, distant and indifferent. "We need a plan," I said, trying to steady my breath. Clara nodded, wiping rain from her face. "I'll tell you everything, the truth I've hidden. It's time." As the rain poured down, we clung to each other, knowing that the coming revelations would change everything. As Clara began to speak, her voice trembling with years of hidden pain, footsteps thundered up behind us. Before I could react, a heavy blow struck the back of my head. The world spun violently, and darkness swallowed me whole. When I finally came to, the cold wind bit at my skin and Clara was gone, vanished without a trace. Panic flooded through me as I stumbled to my feet, searching desperately for any sign of her. Days passed without a word. The police were cautious, slow to act, and I was left with only questions and a growing sense of dread. Then one evening, a call came. Her voice, cold, clinical, broke through the static. Clara's body had been found, dead, lifeless, far from the places she once called home. The news shattered me. The love that had breathed life into my soul now felt like a weight dragging me into an endless night. I was left alone with grief, drowning in questions, in guilt, in a tragedy I couldn't escape. How do you live when the one you loved is gone forever? I walk the streets of Chicago now, but it's not the same city. The lights feel colder, the shadows longer. Every corner holds a memory of Clara, her laugh, her touch, the way she made the world feel possible. But she's gone, and I'm left with the silence she left behind. Some love stories don't have happy endings. Some are just echoes, fading, haunting, impossible to forget. And this is mine.